Hello, everyone, and welcome to our third episode, The Invisible Half. March is Women's History Month, so most of our segments will be reflecting that. But before we dive into that, I'll share some museum updates. First, we will have a book fair at Barnes & Noble Saturday, March 15th. Stop by and see us from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. Pick up a code and a portion of the proceeds will come back to the museum. If you can't make it in person, you can also shop online between the 15th and the 20th. Just enter the book fair ID 12850970 at checkout. Please call us with any questions. We also have an update in our lobby space. We have booths set up so that now you can lounge during your visit. We want to be more of a community space and have been brainstorming how to better make that a reality. So please, come on down and relax. And as a reminder, we are free again this year for Stearns County residents. For our Stories of Our Stuff segment, as I mentioned before, our theme this month is women's history, so I thought it was fitting to use Michelle's case on early domestic labor and life. Our first object takes us to the heart of the homestead, the kitchen. And what better object to start with than a coffee mill from the 1880s? Now, of course, back then, you couldn't just swing by a local coffee shop or pop by any store and have a coffee. So this mill really represents a daily ritual, a ritual that was more than just about a caffeine fix. Imagine starting your day by hand grinding enough coffee for the entire family. Talk about a workout. But I also wonder, was this seen as just another task, or did women take pride in providing this essential staple? I don't know. Personally, I think it might have been both. Coffee was such a central part of life on the homestead beyond just the energy boost. It was a social ritual and something to share with neighbors and even offer visitors. It even had this potential to bring in some extra income if women sold some of their roasted and ground coffee. So coffee could have been a source of both connection and economic agency for women. And that economic aspect, it's really important because while men were often seen as primary breadwinners, women were making these small but significant contributions to the family's finances. And this actually leads us perfectly into our next object, and it also speaks to women's resourcefulness in the kitchen, the kindling kettle. The doof pot, as it was better known, which I just love that name. The doof pot is a copper kettle, and it comes back from the 1860s, and it was truly a lifesaver. It was essentially a way to keep hot coals warm between meals. So think about it, without modern stoves, keeping these coals warm was essential to do essential cooking. You couldn't just turn on the stove. So there was a lot of planning and effort that had to go into each meal. And so women were managing the household's entire energy sources, constantly tending the fire, making sure there were always hot coals ready for cooking. It was really demanding, but very, very crucial. And it's a good reminder that homesteading, it wasn't always the romantic vision that we sometimes have. It was hard work. And women were really at the center of it all, keeping the household running smoothly, and not just running smoothly, but also thriving. Now, our next object, I think, reveals another crucial aspect of women's contributions, and it was a slate from the 1890s. Now, before public schools became widespread, you have to remember that mothers were often the primary educators for their children, and so this slate actually belonged to a young man named William H. Mose, and he used it while attending St. Mary's grade school. And so we're talking about a world of home-based education. It wasn't just teaching the ABCs, it was passing on essential knowledge for survival on the homestead. Literacy was so incredibly valuable for record keeping, correspondence, understanding instructions for farming techniques, and simply just staying informed on what was going on in the world beyond the farm. It was vital for success. And women were entrusted with instilling that in the next generation. That's a huge responsibility, and it makes you think about the impact these women had on shaping young minds and preparing them for the challenges of homesteading life. And let's not forget, they were doing all of this while managing their own incredibly demanding workloads. It's pretty remarkable. And that also brings us to an object that speaks both to their skill and artistry. And we had a hand-woven scarf, and it was just gorgeous to look at. And it was from 1868, made by Elizabeth Sirkin. And it really wasn't just an accessory. It was truly a testament to the time, the effort and the creativity that women would pour into their work. And so Elizabeth Sirkin, she had actually spun the threads herself from raw wool and flax. And so I can't even imagine the patience and the dedication that would have taken. It's quite a far cry from the fast fashion world that we know today. And clothing was often made and repaired at home. So that really just adds on another layer to women's already heavy workload. But again, it speaks to their resourcefulness and their ability to create beauty and comforts in a challenging environment. And it's a powerful reminder that their work, it was about more than just survival. It was about creating a home, expressing themselves, taking pride in their craftsmanship. Michelle displayed another object that might not seem as glamorous as a hand-woven scarf, but I think it's just as significant, and it was an iron from 1888. Now, of course, no electricity, so it's not a plug-in and go type of iron. These kinds of irons were heated using hot coals. And so that process, the heat, the potential for burns, and the physical effort, it really was something else. And Michelle actually provided a tidbit from the American Pure Food Cookbook and Household Economist from 1899. And it actually outlines the 12 steps to the complete laundry process. And so I just can't imagine the organization and planning that went into that. And remembering that this was all done by one person, by hand, no washing machines, no dryers, no running water in a lot of cases. And so laundry wasn't just another chore. It was a massive undertaking. But we also got to see that it had a social aspect. Women would often gather to wash clothes together, and they'd share stories and build community. It was a chance to connect, support each other, and exchange valuable information. And it's interesting how these seemingly mundane tasks actually became opportunities for women to create these social bonds and support networks, especially in what was often a very isolating experience. And these gatherings were really essential for their well-being. And remember that women's roles, they extended far beyond the domestic sphere. They were creating communities, fostering connections, building resilience together, and they were often also doing manual labor on the homesteads as well. And thinking that as the sun was setting on these long and tiring days, our next object comes into play, which was a chamber stick. A simple object, but I think it does paint a picture of what life was like on the dark in the homestead. So imagining a world without electric lights. Like, really take some time to imagine it. The only illumination you have is coming from the flickering flame of a candle. And so the chamber stick was designed for practicality. With a handle and a sturdy base, it was easy to carry around from room to room. Unlike those fancy candlesticks that you find now at an antique store, the chamber stick was all about function. And so I just try to think about what those evenings were like by the fire, the soft glow of the candlelight. It's fascinating to think about. And I also imagine that families gathered around, sharing stories, mending clothes, children doing their lessons. It's just a much slower pace of life compared to our constantly illuminated world. And it's a reminder of the importance of the simple moments of connection and the quiet rhythm of life. They were so central to the homesteading experience. Now, our next object was a little bit mundane again, but I think it held a surprising amount of history. And so it was a 25-cent note from 1866. And this note was actually used during a coin shortage during the Civil War. And it's a reminder of the economic realities of the time and how much the value of money has changed. And so this 25-cent note would be worth about $4.85 today. So a pretty big difference. And this note also brings us back to the topic of women's financial roles on the homestead. We talked about earlier about how they might have earned some income from selling their coffee, for instance. They also usually held control of the family's finances, and they also had contributions through textile production, gardening, and other tasks. So while men were often seen as the primary breadwinners, women were playing vital roles in the family's economic stability, managing the household budget, making purchasing decisions, and often stretching resources to make ends meet. It couldn't have been easy, so it's really amazing to consider the weight of those responsibilities, especially in a time where women's contributions weren't always acknowledged or valued in the same way. I sometimes wonder if these financial roles ever caused tension or conflict, especially in a society that so strongly emphasized men as the head of household. But I do remember that societal norms were very different back then. But I also think it speaks to the strength and resilience of these women. They found ways to navigate those expectations while also ensuring the well-being of their families. They were resourceful, determined, and often had to be incredibly creative to make things work. It's inspiring to think about their strength in the face of all of those challenges. And of course, speaking of challenges, we can't forget the bigger picture of what it was like to be a woman homesteader in Stearns County. They faced isolation, limited access to resources, and often had to contend with some really harsh weather conditions. And we can't overlook the historical context either. This was a time of significant change and upheaval and the displacement of indigenous communities as settlers moved westward. That displacement created a whole nother layer of complexity for women homesteaders who were often navigating unfamiliar territory and interacting with cultures that were very different from their own. And it's important to acknowledge that history and the impact it had on all involved. It adds another dimension to their stories of these women. And while we don't have time to delve too deeply on that aspect today, it's crucial to remember the homesteading experience was shaped by these larger forces of history and cultural interaction. So as we look back on these objects and the stories they fulfilled, think about some key takeaways you think of with the lives of homesteaders of women in Stearns County. And always remember to visit us every couple of months to see the new cases that Michelle has and the stories that she's able to tell with them. We have programs every week this month, so make sure that you don't miss out. Thursday, March 6th at 6 p.m. is our first History Unboxed program, and this month's topic is the Great Depression in Central Minnesota. Join us and learn about how the Great Depression impacted both urban and rural life in Stearns County, and get a chance to work hands-on with a variety of materials from the era. This event is free, and registration is not required. As always, Breakfast Club is the second Wednesday of the month, March 12th at 9 a.m. I will actually be the speaker this time, and I'll be talking about my favorite authors, J.F. Powers and Betty Wall, and their life in both art and love. Coffee and donuts are always provided, and this program is free for members and $7 for non-members. We are kicking off our Heritage Circle tours Thursday, March 20th at Stonehouse Stained Glass at 10 a.m. These exclusive behind-the-scenes tours are offered for Heritage Circle members only. If you are interested in joining, please contact Anne-Marie Johnson. Hops in History is back at Bad Habit Brewing on Thursday, March 20th at 6 p.m. Join us for a brew and learn about the background of some of the most infamous scams in Stearns County history, from Sam Pandolfo's mail fraud to the architect behind one of the biggest Ponzi schemes in the history of the country. This program is free for members and $10 for non-members. And wrapping up this month, we are hosting a Fix-It clinic at the Art Lab in Sauk Center, Friday, March 28th from 4 to 7 p.m. If you have something broken, bring it to the clinic where volunteers will help you fix it for free. While the focus is on mending, you are able to bring small appliances, clothing, electronics, toys, and other household items. Items need to be carry-in sized, and there's a limit of 2 items per household, and this is a first-come, first-served basis. Items will be accepted until 30 minutes before the event ends. Please contact Anne-Marie Johnson with any questions that you might have. On this research segment, we are first talking about a time when things weren't quite so equal for women in sports, and we're going to be looking at the lives of a couple really amazing women, Peggy Brendon and Peps Neuman, and they were real trailblazers. Now, Peggy Brendon was a really talented player at Tech High School, and she could have easily been on the boys' team, but she wasn't allowed to play by the coach. And at the time, even if you were good enough, the rules just said no. The Minnesota State High School League had rules that specifically prevented girls from playing on boys' teams. Now, Peggy was disappointed that she couldn't compete, but she was actually just going to take it until she had heard about a girl at another school who wanted to join the swim team but wasn't allowed to join the boys. And she started to think that there were other people like her, so she decided to do something about it. So she, along with Tony St. Pierre, who was facing similar problems in track, filed a lawsuit in federal court challenging these rules. And they were one of the very first cases ever like this, so they were really out there on the front line. And I think they were really strategic in picking these two girls in these court cases because both were in no-contact sports, and both of them did not have the option of a girls' team at their school. So eventually, throughout this case, the judge did rule in their favor. He said that preventing the girls from competing on boys' teams solely based on their gender was unconstitutional. So it was a huge victory, not just for these two girls, but for all girls in the state. And it kind of set the stage for a lot of change. The victory sent shockwaves throughout the system because other schools realized they could be facing similar lawsuits if they didn't start providing equal opportunities. So it really opened the door. This one case sparked such a wide-reaching change and eventually created Title IX. It's really incredible. And it all started with these two brave girls. Now, let's talk about Peps Neuman, because her story takes us back even further before high school, to a time when organized sports for girls almost didn't exist anywhere, especially for rural communities. Her story is amazing. Because of the lack of rec centers, she would actually practice basketball on a hoop nailed to her family's barn because there was no teams for her to play on. In rural areas, resources were already limited and girls' athletics were just not a priority. So it took an extraordinary person to push through all of that. And Peps was definitely extraordinary. Unfortunately, she didn't get a chance to play organized basketball until her senior year of high school. Luckily, a really supportive advisor agreed to start a girls' athletic association, and so Peps was able to play a few exhibition games. And I'm guessing just those few games after years of practicing by herself must have meant the world to her, and even those few games were hard-won. Those exhibition games in high school made her even more passionate about basketball. The games, they were limited, but they gave her a taste of what it was like to really compete and show off her skills. And it made her realize just how much she had been missing out on. So what happened after high school? Did she just give up on basketball because there weren't really any opportunities? No way. Well, college wasn't really an option for women who wanted to play basketball back then. But Peps had even bigger dreams. She wanted to play professionally, and there was professional women's basketball back then. Of course, it was completely different from what we know from today. The WNBA. No, back then, these were barnstorming teams traveling all over, playing exhibition games, often in front of really small crowds and with limited resources. She actually decided to try out after a professional women's team, the Texas Cowgirls, came to her town to play an exhibition game. So after she tried out, she did make the team. So she went from playing those few high school games to joining a professional team. It was a huge leap of faith, but she had the talent and the drive to make it happen. It's an incredible story. So she played for a few different teams, including the Arkansas Shooting Stars, the Arkansas Lassies, and they traveled all over the country playing these exhibition games in pretty rough conditions. I can only imagine the challenges they faced. They were traveling long distances with little support, and a lot of them had to work other jobs just to make ends meet. So they weren't just athletes, they were just also incredibly resilient and resourceful just to keep their dreams alive. They weren't just playing for themselves. They were playing for the future of women's basketball. They wanted to be taken seriously as athletes, and they wanted to inspire other women to follow their passions. Their dedication is just so inspiring to me. And even with all of these obstacles, Peps didn't just survive in this environment, she actually thrived. Because you have to remember, this was a time when women's professional basketball was really just starting out. There was no established leagues or big contracts or any media attention, but Peps still made a name for herself. She was known for her shooting skills, her competitive spirit, and just her love of the game. She was a force to be reckoned with. So we have Peggy breaking barriers in the courtroom, and we have Peps out there on the court just proving that women can play at a high level. They both had this incredible drive and determination to succeed despite obstacles, and I think that's what makes their stories so powerful. Both Peggy and Peps were real go-getters, pushing boundaries and defying expectations at every turn. They both embodied that pioneering spirit. Their impact went beyond their own accomplishments. They inspired countless other women, and it really helped pave the way for growth and recognition for women's basketball has today. In Peggy's case, before the ruling, there were practically no girls' sports teams in the state of Minnesota. And in just 1 year after that decision, the number of girls' sports programs had significantly increased. So it really had opened the door for girls all over the state. For those women, it wasn't just about playing games. It was about something much deeper. It was about breaking down all of the old stereotypes about what women could and couldn't do. They were told their place was in the home, not on the playing field. And women like Peggy and Peps said no, we're not accepting that anymore. And they were showing the world that women could be strong and competitive and successful. Peggy was demanding that the law recognize women as athletes, and Peps, by going pro in a sport that nobody was really paying attention to, was showing that women could play at the highest level, even without the same support as men. So they weren't just breaking barriers, they were changing the way people thought about women. And I think their stories remind us that we all have the power to change the status quo, to fight for what we believe in, and create our own opportunities. They really embody that spirit of resilience, determination, refusing to be limited by what other people tell you that you can or can't do. So no matter what challenges you're facing, remember your stories. Be bold, be persistent, and don't give up on your dreams. And never underestimate the power of your own voice and your own actions to make a difference. You never know. You might be the next one to inspire a whole generation. Our next person to talk about for Women's History Month is Agatha Blattner Riley. So the Blattners came to Minnesota from Ontario in 1868, and growing up on a homestead did not inspire Agatha to become a farmer's wife. It did the opposite. Instead, Agatha grew a deep appreciation for education and literature. She spoke English, French, and German, and was fortunate enough to attend a one-room school and graduated from 8th grade. She was, however, unable to attend high school, as the closest high school to her was in Foley, which was too far away. However, in 1878, she gained admission to the St. Cloud Normal School at age 18. She was actually delivered her diploma personally by the then governor of Minnesota. She began to teach outside of Holdingford and then west of St. Cloud. Agatha's love for literature was evident in her frequent trips to Minneapolis for book-buying sprees, and she would use her earnings to purchase books beyond the school's resources. Her passion for education and reading greatly influenced her community involvement. In 1890, she married Anthony Riley, who became a major contractor for Great Northern and eventually partnered with his brothers and brothers-in-law to establish the Riley Company. The Riley Company faced challenges, particularly in hiring reliable laborers. It was actually Agatha's innovative system for on-site workers that created a loyal workforce and ensured the company's success. Agatha's community contributions extended beyond the family business. Her dedication to literature and community led her to join the St. Cloud's Reading Room Society, which still exists today. Recognizing the need for a robust public library in St. Cloud after a fire demolished the small holdings that the Reading Room Society cared for previously, she visited numerous libraries to understand the process of securing a Carnegie endowment. With support from local businesses, her congressman, she and the other reading room ladies successfully obtained a Carnegie grant for the library. She stayed active with the library after its creation. Agatha's influence ensured the inclusion of important and diverse titles, advocating for books not written in English to better represent the immigrant population. And my personal favorite fact that I've learned about her, and of course this is not supported by any official documentation, but she is reputed to be the first woman in Minnesota to own and drive her own car, and it was a 1904 curved dash Oldsmobile, which she used to visit her sister in Little Falls. And I remember reading that her grandson talked about that the farmers along the drive called her the crazy lady who drives that noisy horseless carriage. She was just a remarkable woman who really cared for people, and she did even more good deeds than I've listed here. So I really encourage you to take a closer look at her and other women who have left a lasting impact on their community behind the scenes. Hello, everyone. Now we're going to be looking into the life of a woman named Ivy Louise Hildebrand, affectionately called Hildy. And this is a special segment because we have Kristy, our office administrator and volunteer coordinator, with us. Welcome, Kristy. So you mentioned that you picked Ivy because you were interested in her accomplishments?
Yeah, I find Ivy's story inspirational. According to oral history, articles about her, and her own books, Ivy grew up in a time where women had very few rights, yet she still managed to reach her dreams and goals.
Okay, so you got a good chance to take a really personal look into her life with those sources then. Glancing over some of them, I noticed she was born in the early 1900s in the very rural northeast Stearns County. What was life like for her?
Ivy attended a one-room schoolhouse in Ashley Township until she reached the 8th grade. Due to living in such a rural township, she didn't have immediate access to high school. She had to work for room and board so she could attend high school in Sauk Center.
Oh, working for room and board to attend high school. That is dedication. Did you find that fierce ambition and resolve surprising for the time, considering the social norms and expectations for women?
Yes, there were a few opportunities for women in the early 1900s, especially during the Great Depression. Women were expected to stay home and take care of the house and children. Mm-hmm. The career opportunities were few, such as sewing and nursing. Women didn't have the same rights as men did, so they were paid less and denied promotions and benefits.
So it sounds like she really seized every opportunity she had when they came up so that she could kind of get away from that, though.
She did. With the support of her family, she was able to attend high school, which wasn't as common, especially for women. After high school, Ivy took a year of training with the teacher training department in Sauk Center so she could become a teacher.
Okay, so she just went right into teaching then.
Ivy wanted to continue her education, but the Great Depression had started. Working as a teacher, she was only making $480 a year. So Ivy decided to take summer courses to continue her education, as she couldn't afford to attend school year-round. Eventually, she received her 2-year teaching certificate. It wasn't until 1948 that Ivy earned a Bachelor of Science degree from St. Cloud State, and 1960 before she achieved her master's degree.
Wow. All the way up to getting a master's degree. To think of where she started and her educational outlook to where she was there. It's really a testament to her commitment to lifelong learning. I am actually familiar with her master's thesis because she eventually turned that into a book. I've used it a bit in the research center. Why don't you talk about that?
Ivy combines her academic pursuits and the love of her hometown to create her thesis, History of Sauk Center. Ivy's thesis is still regarded as the only comprehensive official history of Sauk Center. Her thesis shows women making a mark in academia.
Now, I also saw that in addition to all this teaching and education she was pursuing, she was also a field secretary lobbyist for the Minnesota League of Women Voters. What kind of challenges did women face back then, and what was she doing?
The right to vote was relatively new for women. There was still pushback, especially for women of color. Ivy advocated for policies that empowered women, educated voters, and worked with opposition from those who wanted to maintain the status quo.
Wow. That had to have taken a lot of courage.
Yes, courage and conviction.
I do wonder, though, if her own struggles for educational opportunities kind of inspired that desire to champion women's political engagement. But I really still can't get over the fact that she was doing all of this while juggling advanced studies and teaching.
Ivy was dedicated to her dream of teaching. She had said that high school was one of the best things to happen to her. She was determined to reach her goals.
I suppose that does make sense, considering at the time, anyone in her generation, high school was a big accomplishment, but particularly for girls, that had to have been an immense privilege.
It was. Going to high school, especially for a woman who grew up in the rural areas, was rare. There were no buses, which is why she had to work for room and board in Sauk Center. Most children went straight to work after the 8th grade. Most women were still expected to stay home.
Right. And I think her gratitude really highlights that stark reality of limited opportunities for women, particularly in rural areas. I think of how far we've come, but also the fact that there's still even more work to be done.
Absolutely. Ivy's view on that opportunity is a reminder of the transformative power of education, particularly for women. It's an opportunity for personal growth, professional fulfillment, and the ability to take control of one's future. Education was the foundation she built her life on. Ivy later returned to Sauk Center after she retired in 1972.
I did know that one. She spoke about it once. I remember because she said, "There's just something about a small town, and I am a small town person at heart." And it's funny for me because she worked and lived most of her life in Wilmer, and that's where I'm from, in Candiota County. And while it is definitely bigger than Sauk Center, I do not consider Wilmer to be a big bustling town by any means, but I do suppose that is all relative. But it's lovely to see that she was drawn back to her roots after achieving so much. And I do think that represents her deep connection with the people in her community.
People who knew Ivy had said she was provocative, ageless, interesting, young at heart, and a little vinegary, adorable gal. Ivy wasn't afraid to speak her mind. She was a contemporary who wasn't stuck in the past, but who dealt very much in the present.
I love that, vinegary. It really shows that she had a complex and captivating personality. She was someone who seemed to have defied simple labels, a woman of strength, intelligence, and a deep love for her students and community.
Right. She not only achieved incredible things, but she paved the way for other women. Her story highlights the power of determination, resilience, and the pursuit of knowledge. She was and still is an inspiration for women facing societal barriers.
Absolutely. I mean, even just you and me have been inspired by her and her dedication to education, her passion for history, and her advocacy for women's rights. I think it makes her an inspiring role model. And I'm interested to know because while I know her work on Sauk Center historically is still used today, I am curious to know if she's ever inspired anyone else with her activism. I'd love to see how her legacy lives on.
It's people like Ivy who have stood up for what they believe in, reached their goals, and didn't let society stop them from achieving their goals. We should seek out those whom she has inspired.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for listening to the story of Ivy Hildebrand. I hope it's been inspiring to you as it was for me.
Yes, and hopefully this will encourage you to explore the stories of other remarkable women in your own communities. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.